For those of you who are unaware, there is a glitch in Tornado Outbreak that lets you essentially float above the map. And I've wanted to push the limit and see, well, how high can our hero Zephyr can go. Now around this area, we'll notice that Zephyr and the Wind Warrior are both viewable, but yet very tiny in this state. The world is pretty much remained the same, but I think some of the textures are becoming lower resolution, I think. Other than that, the map is still completely intact. As you see, Wind Warrior himself, as the second player, he looks pretty much the same. So, as we continue jumping, you will begin to notice that the more you jump, the more the map becomes, well, the larger the map becomes, essentially. And by this point, you can't even see Wind Warrior at all, unless you were to zoom the camera in by like 300%. But you can still happen to view Zephyr. The top. It's very teeny tiny. But for some weird reason, the game does not hide any of the models. Now, by this point, you probably can't even see Zephyr. Well, you probably can. The little dot that you see, yeah, that's Zephyr. He's barely visible. One thing that you'll begin to notice is that the entire map itself looks like it's becoming enlarged by the skybox. And so what essentially happens is that every time the tornado moves, the skybox essentially moves with it. So with that in mind, for some reason, instead of the skybox going up whenever you're jumping high up in the sky, or in this case like excessively jumping to the point where you can't even see the characters, the skybox, it shifts forward. Now at this point, Zephyr can still be seen by zooming in, but Wind Warrior, you might have to zoom in a little bit more. Now around this point, Zephyr himself is still viewable, but he's still a dot. With that in mind, it'll get to the point where you can't even see him, and the skybox itself it's moving closer and closer towards the map. And at this point, Zephyr himself is starting to become hard to see. He now looks more like a flea, to put it into perspective. Like if you were to move your head, you probably couldn't even find him unless you're paying really attention. So I think at this point it's safe to assume that we lost Zephyr around this portion. as he is no longer visible, per se. And while the skybox shifts forward, it's also pulling the map like downwards. A little interesting tidbit here is that I believe the Wind Warrior, the one near the lake, I believe he actually moves. I might be wrong, but I think his model moves. I think whenever the player turns the camera around. I'm not sure, but I believe it that he does. So, yeah. So as we can see, the map is becoming more, it's shrinking more and more to the point where it won't even be visible unless you were to use a Dolphin FreeCam feature. And which surprisingly, once the entire map is hidden from view, it's still rendered there. It's not like called out or disappeared like all the other objects that you see, which is kind of interesting in a way. Now around this part, it looks like the map is just completely like sliding out of existence, and neither Zephyr or Wind Warrior is visible. And at this point, all you're seeing now is just the skybox. However, if we were to take the camera, shown here, the map itself, it's still there. You just can't see it unless you were to move the camera up. See an idling Wind Warrior. Interestingly enough, his animations still play despite the fact that you aren't able to see it. So, around the 11-minute mark, it turns out, I do believe that there is an end to how far Zephyr can jump, or to the point where the camera just stops tracking Zephyr's height. And that is around close to like the top of the skybox, as shown here. At this point, the map itself, I don't even think might be faintly visible, but you would have to like move the camera in a way. You would have to know the original location and how far it shifted in order to find it, because otherwise it's completely hidden. Now, if I were to disable the camera, you will notice that the player 1 screen is completely black. And this is because, well, when you're playing as one player, the camera essentially just stops as soon as you reach the limit, which is top of the skybox. However, if you drop player 2 and then player 2 rejoins, you'll notice that Zephyr and the Wind Warrior will be spawned into a black void. Now at this point, I do not think that it is possible to find the skybox or even find the map itself. That's how high as you can go. Now, could I have done this a different way? Probably. Instead of spamming the A button on the Wii remote for like 18 minutes, I probably could have used a Gecko code that made Zephyr just levitate in the air. I don't know why I didn't do that, but I should have done that. But with that being said, yeah, this was pretty much how high Zephyr can jump.